Welcome to All Pro Football Data. My name is Jim Coburn, and today's episode we're talking about running back combine testing. So we're going to be looking at testing numbers, what matters for the combine. I'm not going to get a chance to do every single position with this. So I would like to do quarterbacks, wide receivers, tight ends, offensive linemen, defensive linemen, etc., to kind of go over the combine testing, what matters. But I would rather just focus on running backs because I think it's a good way to kind of dispel a lot of issues with the combine in terms of how people report it, how people talk about it, the statements that people have. A lot of people will say, I don't care about the 40-yard dash, I care about the 10-yard split. Or they say, I don't care about the 40-yard dash or the vertical and the broad jump. All I care about is their short shuttle and the three cone. These are the numbers that really matter. When in reality, what does the data say? Like, what is the more correlative statistics in terms of athletic testing at the running back position? That's what we're going to look at. Another thing we're going to do is we're going to look at raw versus mass density metrics, because some people may ask, why the heck do you use mass density metrics? Why don't you just use raw numbers like RAS does? Not to try to attack RAS at all in terms of relative athleticism scoring. I love that concept. It's a much easier thing to kind of look at, but mass density metrics are more correlative than just the raw numbers. And we're going to take a look at the difference between just looking at the raw 40-yard dash versus looking at their vertical and their broad jump versus, all those other sort of things. So we're going to compare those numbers to kind of see what matters more and what things you should take a look at in terms of the running back position, also dispelling rumors along the way. So with all that stuff out of the way, let's get to the show, guys. Getting to the first part, mass density athleticism testing. So for those that do not know what the heck this is, let me fill you in. Mass density is weight divided by height to get you their mass density. Then athleticism testing is the vertical jump, the broad jump, the 40-yard dash, the short shuttle, the three cone. These things are measured against mass density, and that basically gets you a percentile score against positional peers, which gets you the mass density athleticism testing. The first thing we're going to look at is the explosive lower body strength score. So this score is derived from the vertical and broad jump measured against mass density. Then that score is measured against the average approximate value per percentile range. So essentially, I took approximate value. I looked at, okay, all the running backs that scored a 90 percentile in terms of either their explosive lower body strength score or their raw vertical and broad jump, what was the average approximate value in the 90 percentile, in the 80 percentile, 70 percentile, 60 percentile, 50, and so on and so forth. And I think the biggest thing that you can see is that the 90 and 89 percentile are pretty much neck and neck in terms of the raw, vertical, and broad jump data. But then you start to see where the raw numbers get a little wonky. So looking at the 70 percentile, the explosive lower body strength score is more correlative than the raw numbers. And then when you get to the 69 to 60 percentile, the raw numbers, vertical and broad jump, are wonky again. So in terms of the 60 percentile, it's wonky. And then when you go to the 59 percentile and 49 percentile, it's a little bit more stable. And then when you get to the 39 percentile, you see that the raw, vertical, and broad jump numbers, there's a big spike in terms of that. So what I'm trying to say is essentially this. The raw numbers are good, but there is more of a stronger correlation. There's less static in terms of the data when you look at the mass density adjusted production, or I should say score, versus the raw number. So if you just look at the raw numbers at face value and percentile score it, you're kind of going all over the place because you have guys who put up 3.25 in terms of their approximate value with a 39 to 30 percentile vertical and broad jump. But did you adjust for their weight? That is what mass density does. It adjusts for their weight. So you could use the raw numbers, but when you do mass density, it makes a clearer line between good and bad. It just does. It makes a clear statement. It's more correlative. It has more of a slope to it versus the static that the raw numbers do. And this is with the explosive lower body strength score. What is it with the speed score? Well, the mass density versus the raw 40 at running back, you can see that you have a higher correlation between the mass density speed score versus the regular 40-yard dash. For the most part, though, the raw 40-yard dash is about the same in terms of slope compared to the mass density speed score, but you can clearly see that 90 percentile speed score has a much higher, significantly higher approximate value score, so it's more correlative. It's more correlative to look at the mass density speed of a prospect than it is to look at the raw 40-yard dash. The raw 40-yard dash still matters, of course. You can still use it. It still has some utility, but you're going to find much better or more value looking at the mass density of a prospect speed score versus just the raw speed score. That's essentially what I'm trying to say. And then the last part is with flexibility scores versus raw scores versus mass density agility. So the one thing that kind of makes me a little bit different than most is I do something called the dynamic speed score or flexibility score. This is something I did not create. This is something that I borrowed from people that were doing it back in the day, probably about 10 years ago. Is they wanted to see, okay, what's the dynamic speed? So it's not just about being fast. How shifty are you? Guys that are fast and flexible and have great, short shuttle three cone, what do those guys do? How do those guys perform? And what I think you'll see is that the flexibility score is more consistent, again, more consistent, more stable between the 99 percentile down to the low percentile versus the raw agility score. So the raw agility score takes, the short shuttle and three cone, doesn't look at the 40-yard dashes, adds them together, and then ranks them from slowest, or I should say fastest to slowest. And then when you look at the mass density agility score, this takes out the 40-yard dash. This just looks at the agility of a prospect for his size, if you will. And when you look at the numbers here, you can clearly see that the flexibility score is a little bit more stable in terms of the top to the bottom. So essentially, the higher the score you have, the higher your approximate value is. But this is a big but. Taking a look at the explosive lower body strength score, the flexibility score, and the speed score in terms of the 90 percentile has a much higher approximate value. And in general, the higher your speed score is, the higher your approximate value is going to be, regardless of your agility, regardless of your explosive lower body strength score. So everybody that talks about, I want to look at the short shuttle three cone, when you look at the short shuttle three cone, it's more spread out. Like, just because you have a high short shuttle three cone doesn't mean you're going to be an elite running back at the next level. I mean, yes, it's going to increase your level there, but when you just look at the raw agility scores by themselves, just by themselves, not looking at mass density, even adjusted for mass density, the raw agility scores, there's not much of a difference between being an average agility guy versus an upper end agility guy when you look at the raw numbers at face value. And of course, when you add mass density into it, it gets really wonky in terms of, guys with 39 and 20 percentile mass density agility, typically are about the same as guys with 80 percentile mass density agility for their size. So again, when you look at agility scores, I think adding the 40-yard dash helps to stabilize it and helps its utility a little bit more as a actual number to look at, because you can clearly see that with the raw agility numbers, there's not that big of a correlation there overall between the 90 percentile and the 19 percentile. I mean, there is a slight correlation, but it becomes more correlative and more stable when you look at the flexibility score without looking at the raw numbers and the mass density scores. That's essentially what I'm trying to say. So moving on to another thing. This is something I think doesn't get discussed enough. Running back skill set. Another factor in running back evaluation is the skill set of the running back. Now, this is just an anecdotal thing. I haven't actually done a study to look at this, kind of take every single running back and just kind of do like an actual study with it. But running backs that are not uber athletes, but they excel in different combinations of athletic traits is a real thing. So just because a running back has a 90 plus percentile explosive score and speed score and flexibility score, you don't need that to be a running back. You don't have to be a 90 plus percentile speed guy to be an elite running back at the NFL level. You don't have to be an elite explosive lower body strength score guy or short shoulder three cone guy to be a great running back at the NFL level. You just need to have some elite combination of traits in terms of your athleticism testing to do that. So, for example, just looking at these running backs, I just kind of cherry picked a couple running backs to give you an example of what I'm talking about. Take LaDainian Tomlinson. LaDainian Tomlinson is like the elite running back prospect in terms of athleticism. He's 90 plus percentile in his explosion score, speed score, flexibility score. He's like the Saquon Barkley, the uber athletic running backs that just they're so far up there, like the Calvin Johnson of running back prospects is essentially what it is for him. And you look at those numbers, you go, wow, that's great. But do you really need to be like that? No, you could be a guy like Adrian Peterson. Adrian Peterson, based on his testing numbers, he was an 80 percentile explosion back with 90 percentile speed, and then he had a 60 percentile short shoulder and three cone. So his flexibility for his size wasn't that great. He was kind of stiff, but he was an uber explosive, uber fast running back that translated to the NFL level at a high level, basically a power back. Other backs that are like this are like Marshawn Lynch, for example, is another running back that has a similar trait like this, where he's explosive, he's fast, he's just not very flexible. Not as flexible in terms of his lower body agility. He just wasn't as agile, but he's stupid explosive and stupid fast for his size. Then you have a guy like Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook had a 70 percentile speed score with a significantly below average explosion score and significantly below average agility score or flexibility score. So a lot of people wrote Dalvin Cook off because he didn't have a great combine, but look at his data. Like, he had a good speed score. He just wasn't very explosive and wasn't very flexible for his size, but he still was able to take those traits and become something special at the NFL level. Take a look at LaShawn McCoy. LaShawn McCoy had a significantly below average explosive lower body strength score, but he did have a near elite flexibility score and above average speed for his size, which he translated at the next level. And then the last prospect to mention is Alvin Kamara, who had an elite explosive lower body strength score with average speed and below average flexibility, and he ended up being a pretty decent back as well. So the bottom line is this when it comes to running backs at the combine. The speed score is the biggest predictor for approximate value of running backs compared to the explosive lower body strength score and agility testing, even when adjusting for speed. So the main thing that helps flexibility to become a stable metric in predicting NFL players is when you add the 40-yard dash to the agility score. So if you just look at the agility scores by themselves, they're not as effective as when you add it to the speed score. Isn't that crazy? I mean, to me, it makes sense, of course, because if you go with the more correlative athleticism number and you add a number that isn't as correlative, but it kind of stabilizes it a little bit, makes it more, gives it more utility, if you will, in terms of that. And then, of course, looking at mass density, I think mass density is the preferred method of scoring correlation as it has more uniform results from the high end to the low end. So you can look at the raw numbers and you can make conclusions based on the raw numbers, but when you add mass density to it, it just makes more sense, guys. How fast a player is for their size is much more important versus just how fast they are in raw number terms. I mean, I think it's just basic physics, if you will, especially at the NFL level where you're hitting guys at high speeds, and chasing guys at high speeds. So, it just makes sense from that perspective. Next up, I think the purpose of scouting is all athleticism should be viewed in terms of skill set rather than pure athletic ability. So I'm not a big fan of looking at athleticism in a bubble. Like, I don't like to add all the numbers together and then shoot out one athleticism number for a prospect. I don't think that's fair. I don't think it takes into account the skill set that they have as a prospect. I think you need to look at their athleticism traits individually because they have different types of skill sets. Every running back is going to find success with a different type of skill set at the NFL level. Some of them are fast, some of them are explosive, some of them have great agility and at least decent speed for their size. So you have to kind of see what that skill set is and see, okay, this skill set worked, this athletic skill set worked at the NFL level, so this guy might be able to do what this guy did because they have similar skill sets. That is what I think you really need to do in terms of athleticism testing. Don't just look at the raw numbers. Don't just look at, the guys who scored in the 90 plus percentile as uber athletes. You need to look at the other guys, the guys that you say didn't have a good combine, but in reality, they don't have to have a great combine. They just have to test well in one particular area to really have a major impact at the NFL level. I think that gets lost in the conversation. It gets lost in the sauce. Is that these NFL players have different, diverse skill sets. Find the skill set, find what they're great at, and then find a scheme to put them in to make them great in that particular scheme based on their athleticism testing. I think it makes basic sense to me, but it's a concept that I think adds nuance to the discussion that people don't like for whatever reason. And then finally, like I said, this combine is going to be interesting. There's going to be a lot of running back prospects. I think this is a fairly strong running back class based on the data that I've seen and the athletic testing that they might put up. This might be a very good running back combine. So I'm very excited to see where it goes, and I want to hear from you guys. What are some of your questions in terms of running back combine testing? If I didn't answer them in this video, and also I would like for you to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. If you love the content that I'm putting out there, why not subscribe? If you like the video, and of course, do those other sort of things. So thank you so much for watching. My name is Jim Coburn, also known as Geometrics on Twitter or X. Also check out my Patreon page, patreon.com/jcoburn. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.